Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is still Victor Shi. It is Monday, December 19th, and I'm calling in from France. I hope all of you had a great weekend. This week may be the week of Christmas, but there are so many things that are happening, all of which I think are critical to justice, accountability, our democracy. First, we have the January 6th hearing at 1 p.m. Eastern today, and then later this week, the committee will be sending out its final report to the public, and so that'll be a great Christmas or Hanukkah or holiday read for all of us. And then the House Ways and Means Committee will meet to discuss Trump's taxes tomorrow. And then also today, there's the Proud Boys trial over their role of January 6th, so it's going to be a packed week, and I am so fortunate to have someone who is an expert on national security, Malcolm Nance, and he's going to help me break down what's happening in the U.S., abroad, and even Twitter. So, Malcolm, thank you so much for being on. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, salut, Victor. Where are you at in France?
So I'm currently in Nice, France, and then going back to Paris tomorrow.
J'aime la Nice. Okay, I just left France. I got brought out of France to decompress, or to France to decompress when I left Ukraine a few weeks ago.
Wow. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, and we want to get to Ukraine. But I first want to ask you about some of the domestic issues first, chiefly the January 6th developments. And we recently learned about the charging of top members of the Oath Keepers with seditious conspiracy. And then this week, there's the Proud Boys trial. And I'm wondering from a national security perspective, how important it is to hold these groups accountable.
Well, it's very important to hold them accountable. And you might recall, I wrote a book which came out last July called They Want to Kill Americans, which really went through in great detail all the players that are now been charged in the January 6th conspiracy, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, Boogaloo Boys, all of these groups. And it's extremely important to hold them accountable. But now, as people are being convicted of sedition, other crimes, getting 5-10 years in prison, now we see this movement happening amongst the Republican caucus where they want to actually call them political prisoners and essentially work to get them freed or pardoned by Donald Trump should he become president in the future. I mean, these are the people that literally work to overthrow the United States government.
Wow. I mean, like treating them like victims is just so sad. So just as a matter of educating our audience, and I'm curious about this, what do these far right groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers thrive off of? So in other words, I mean, like what keeps them going? Like, what keeps people attached to these groups?
Yeah, fascinating thing. And as a matter of fact, I wrote an article in my new Substack this morning about the threats that the hangers on to these groups could pose should Donald Trump, be criminally referred or even indicted in the future. It's very strange because the Oath Keepers and Stewart Rhodes started this group back in the 1990s, essentially to ask members of the armed forces and the law enforcement, to not take action against American citizens if the government decides that they're going to suppress the American public using the armed forces or the police, which is absolutely fascinating. That was their whole shtick. It became a right-wing militia over that time, which was the core body were members of the armed forces. A lot of the people in what I call the Titus, right, the Trump insurgency in the United States, these are the people that all completely voted for Donald Trump and believe that he is essentially just as close to a god as you can get, what they call ultra MAGAs, that they view these Oath Keeper personnel as center bodies to how they should be led, that these should be the leaders of these groups, and that because they're military and have military experience, that's where they're going to get their inspiration, their training, and their guidance from former military people. They're too lazy, too fat, too whatever, not to join the armed forces themselves, so they glom onto that. That is a very big organization, I think, with 20-some thousand members, and all of them espouse that they have guns and that they're going to, stand against the United States government. The most fascinating part of the Oath Keepers is, remember, they started as a group where you're supposed to swear you would not take action against the United States government. They stepped in as the core group to overthrow the United States government.
Wow.
And begging the president to commit civil, martial law and use the army to put down Democrats and liberals. It's just absolutely 180 degrees out of what they started the group for.
So, I mean, I don't want it to be lost on anyone. You mentioned that the composition of these groups are partly military folks and people who served there. Is that still true right now in terms of when you look at the composition of Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and these far right extremist groups? How much of it is former military officials? And I guess, I mean, that concerns me. How concerning should that be to all of us?
20%. And that's what we're hearing. 20% of the people arrested on January 6th were former or active members of the armed forces or law enforcement. There's a famous case where they had the Drug Enforcement Administration officer with his firearm, with his credentials. There, even though he was resigning from the DEA, he was weeks away from ending service, came to the Capitol armed. We had the policemen from Southern Virginia, the sheriff's deputies, came armed with their badges and their vehicles, which could have had firearms in them. We don't know. But a very large number of people, who precipitated the attack were former members of the armed forces. One of the first people into the building was an active duty Marine Corps colonel who smashed through the windows, got out, then opened the doors in the face of the Capitol rioters. It's a dangerous threat because to the people who are insurgents or insurrectionists, they view them as leadership. They view them as people they should follow into battle. As they live this fantasy that they are cleansing the United States government and doing the Second American Revolution to bring America back to the way it was, which is against everything that America was, right?
I mean, there's this really scary study. Actually, so I'm originally from Chicago, and there's this one U Chicago professor who worked with a team to look at who stormed the Capitol on that day. And it's these ordinary people who just are a part of suburban neighborhood. They're educated people. And you wouldn't think that those were the type of people who would go and storm the Capitol, but they are. And so it's kind of this, again, this ideology, like what brings them in? And do you think that now with people at the top of, right now, I guess the Proud Boys and also Oath Keepers, with those people on trial and facing some sort of criminal charge, do you think that kind of sucks the oxygen and momentum out of these groups?
Yes and no. Now, interesting that you're in France. So when you go back to Paris, I want you to go visit the Place de Bastille, right?
Yes.
The place where the Bastille used to be. When the French Revolution started in 1792, they had a pretty good complaint. Right? The country was starving. The average person was completely famished. There was no economy except supporting the ultra-rich oligarchs, right? And Robespierre and the rest, of the Paris polity, right? The street rose up in revolution and then beheaded everybody, okay, including the leadership that started the revolution. Robespierre himself was put to the guillotine. This is very different. Those people were also the street, but the people who carried out the attack on the Capitol in the United States, there's a reason that they're common, average, ordinary people. Right? Revolutions are formed by them. What you have is a radicalized base where the average Republican voter is fed a continuous stream of lies. And those stream of lies become their truth. And their truth is being reflected on the street. 40,000 people, according to the Park Service, came to that rally for President Trump. 10,000 laid siege to the building. 2,000 to 3,000 entered the building. Almost 1,000 have been charged. And early on, I kept saying, they're going to put, if they're going to be ridiculed, they're going to be called terrorists. They're going to step away from this a little bit. In the first 6 months after the attack, we saw that was completely wrong. They tripled, quadrupled, and quintupled down. They think they own the country themselves, and that every other person who is not a Trump supporter, who is not a Christian evangelical, who does not support their agenda, that we are now enemies to their imagined version of America in their head. And but to get that imagined version, you've got to eliminate what America has been for the last 248 years. And it's like that old Onion story way back when man cites his version of the Constitution, which is a weird amalgam of the Pledge of Allegiance, the Star-Spangled Banner, and the Bill of Rights. Like none of that is in the Constitution. So that's what they think. It's almost cult-like. It's very ISIS-like, Al-Qaeda cult thinking that
Oh
leads
my
to
gosh.
terrorism.
I mean, you literally gave me chills when you said that. I want to turn to Ukraine because I know you've been on the ground there. And first of all, thank you so much for all that you have done there, your reporting, your service there. Tell our audience what you saw on the ground being there and kind of what your role was in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, first off, there were two different Malcolm Nances in Ukraine, right? There was the warfare analyst Malcolm Nance from
Yes, yes.
January to mid-February. I actually left Ukraine the night of the attack by complete and total fluke. I was supposed to have left a week earlier, got COVID, and flew out and landed in Dublin just in time to hear that the attacks had taken place. And the airport that I flew out was destroyed.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just hours earlier. I was on the last flight out of that country. And what's absolutely fascinating is that, you know, I knew it was coming. We saw it was coming. I drove every highway in the country where the invasion routes were. We analyzed the order of battle of the enemy. We could see that the concentrations were there for them to carry out an invasion and even assess that they wouldn't, you know, I was one of the few analysts that assessed they would never take that country. They could never win that war because I had been out with the Ukrainian army. And the Ukrainian army just sat there for 2 weeks loading their guns, you know, warming up their Javelin missiles and getting ready to destroy the Russian offensives, which is exactly what happened. Fast forward to a week after the invasion, I left, you know, I was back in the United States. I got all my military gear because I was, you know, I spent decades in the U.S. Armed Forces and served all around the world in the intelligence community. I had a lot of gear and grabbed all my battle rattle, flew to Ukraine and joined the International Legion for the Territorial Defense of Ukraine. So I am a soldier in the Ukrainian forces and was a member of Defense Intelligence Ministry, the 1st Battalion Infantry. And then now I'm, you know, when I left, I was acting sergeant major of the 3rd Battalion Special Forces of the International Legion. So I was carrying out special operations missions from September until I left, including the Kharkiv counteroffensive. So I was combatant in the war.
Well, we love both Malcolm Nances. And speaking of Kharkiv, I read the other day on Friday, Russia launched airstrikes that hit Kharkiv and left, I think, 3 people dead and a couple others injured. I'm just wondering, so, I mean, we've seen these types of strikes happening, and for so long, despite all of this, Ukrainians have been so steadfast. They've been they've proven to be so resilient. The Western world is standing with Ukraine, and it seems like Putin is a bit of a lone wolf in this time. And so I'm wondering how you see Putin's calculation right now at this point in the war. Like, how much longer will this go on?
Well, you mean how long will the 72-hour war that he thought would overthrow the Ukrainian government, that he thought would kill Volodymyr Zelensky? He actually sent 36 special operations people into Kiev that were stationed around there that were all rolled up or shot and killed in the first day. That his army would just para-jump into the country or helicopter assault into the country, and they would just take it over and win. Yeah, we're getting ready to push, you know, our 10th month of that war. I think we're at 300 some odd days of the 3-day war. Russia is definitively, without any question, do not make a mistake when I say this, they are losing this war. And I know I've been helping them lose. You know, the stories that you hear, and I think U.S. news media is not covering it. They cover things like the airstrikes. Well, when you mention airstrikes in Kharkiv, look, I had to turn off my air raid warning app when I came back to the United States. Kharkiv gets hit 10, 12 times a day. We have air raids and artillery, you know, light scatterings of artillery, as we call it, all day, every day in a city like Kharkiv, because it's only 40 kilometers from the Russian border. Kiev and every other city is now being hit because Putin is lashing out of sheer frustration. He is angry that the Ukrainians were able to live a normal life for almost 10 months. And so on the suggestion of a TV host, Russia's version of Tucker Carlson, Volodymyr Solovyov, that they should starve them. They should let them freeze. They should have no power. They should have no internet. He is now putting an effort using all of their strategic missile and rocket forces and drone forces for the sole function of attacking power plants. That's it. That's all he's attacking. And they're desperate. And the Ukrainians, look, I spent a lot of time with the Ukrainians. I've
Yeah.
fought, with the Ukrainians. These are the wrong people to screw with. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no adversity they won't tolerate. They are the happiest of warriors, and it is their fighting spirit that is breaking the Russians. I mean,
Mhm.
we've taken Russian prisoners. I've seen these guys, hapless and wounded. They live in filth. They have no decent equipment. And when they do get captured, we generally capture all their equipment. So Russia's the biggest supplier of the International Legion in weapons and equipment right now, and the Ukrainian army. Um, they just don't seem to know why they're there.
Yeah.
And when they get into a fight, we bring it. I mean, we don't hold back at all. The Ukrainians, you got to restrain them a little because they really want to liberate their lands. And when we did our counteroffensive in September, it was incredibly satisfying. It was like being in France in 1944, where people were just coming out of their homes and hugging us and kissing us and liberating their towns.
Wow. Well, that's great news, and I'm glad that Russia is losing. Like, what will be the end point of the story? Like, when will we be able to say Russia has lost and Ukraine has won? What would that look like, I guess?
I'm going to make another one of my fantastic prognostications. In June in Davos, I did a teleconference to Davos where I predicted that Russia's offensive power would become an ability to stop the Ukrainians and their counteroffensive power would be in September. And that's precisely what happened. You could just feel it. It was just calculable from the ground. There will be a winter offensive, according to General Zalushi, commander of the armed forces. He's got two of the most capable commanders in the field, General Sersky and General Pavlyuk, both of whom I met in the pre-war. These guys can't be beat. They want the fight. They love the fight. And they will push all winter. They'll do reconnaissance and force, probe the Russian lines. And at some point, the Russians are going to break. They're going to shatter like a pane of glass against the sledgehammer. And then a spring offensive will come, and we could quite possibly take back all of Kherson, Prava, Zaporizhzhia, even Luhansk, and quite possibly Donetsk, which were all gains. I'd say 90% of gains since 2014. That's a possibility that we could be on the border of Crimea by next summer.
Wow. That is...
Russia will have to do something drastic, and I'd hate to say what that is.
Wow, so that's pretty amazing. So in the remaining time that we have left, right before we got on, we were talking about Elon Musk and his picture at the World Cup yesterday. And you mentioned how he was dressed like Zelensky. Can you talk more about that? And kind of, I find that fascinating.
Elon Musk and Jared Kushner. I mean, two of the most hapless Bond villains that you'll ever see. I mean, the only thing he's missing is the yacht that breaks off into a hydrofoil boat with the tank full of sharks in it. He literally wants to be something. And as we've found out over the last few weeks, the what did they say? The rubric that billionaires are geniuses is finished.
Yes.
These people only have money because they're given money, and they know how to make money by taking other people's money. This man has no common sense whatsoever. And what he's done with Twitter was expose himself to Twitter. I mean, something he thought he could take over as a weapon system, re-platform a Republican agenda, which he said he was doing, and that he would help win the Republicans an election by essentially buying one of the arguably the second most valuable megaphone in social media. But it's a megaphone, and it does not necessarily, it's not a tape recorder, all right, in a broadcast system. There are people out there with opinions. So, but him coming up to the World Cup with a green shirt, only missing the cross of St. Michael to mimic Zelensky looked pitiful. It was laughable, him and Jared Kushner, right? Like I said, the two of the pastiest white Bond villains on this planet. You think the guy could afford a tanning machine as a billionaire, but now he's no longer the richest man in the world. And I think his stocks will tumble over time. And you'll find out him to be one of the most failed billionaires, second only to Donald Trump and Jared Kushner.
I think, what's his name? Anand Giridharadas wrote this great piece in the New York Times about how the billionaire class is showing that they aren't the saviors that we all thought that they were. These are people who have just been given wealth and have a tremendous amount of privilege, and they think that the rules don't apply to them. So we'll see what happens to Twitter. But you mentioned your Substack, you mentioned your book. Where can our audience find you other than Twitter if that place collapses soon?
Yeah, now that we have, I call it the flaming bird, right?
Yeah.
It's on fire. It's spiraling down. It looks like a satellite that's tumbling back into Earth. That's what Elon Musk has made of Twitter. And I think the infrastructure is collapsing. We're already seeing signs of that. When he's not canceling Twitter Spaces, it's buggy. I think that quite possibly this thing could happen very soon. So in that respect, I'm moving most of my commentary, like this video, will go over to Substack, which is malcolmnance.substack.com. And I'm also on, I have a fan page on Facebook. You'll be seeing more on Instagram.
Sure.
I have a lot of material, by the way. And I have a podcast that's going to be coming out that I started before the invasion. And I had to stop because I joined the Army. And it's called the Black Man Spy Podcast. And that will come out. And it'll show a lot of footage from Ukraine, including combat footage that I refuse to show to the general public. You always get those right wingers are like, oh, you're in a hotel room in Poland. No, I'm not. Even Russian state TV reports me as being the evil African-American NATO officer on the war front. So, but that stuff will be out there, very exclusive stuff. And of course, my typical shouty rants about topics du jour in geopolitics, intelligence, and war.
Wonderful. Well, please go check out Malcolm Nance on those platforms. And I'm very excited to listen to this podcast. It sounds very exciting. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us. And I always learn a lot whenever I hear you speak and on Twitter. So thank you for being with us today.
Well, my pleasure, Victor. You're doing a great job yourself.
Thank you so much. Okay, so that was such a wonderful episode with Malcolm Nance. As you heard, I mean, there's really no one better to speak about Ukraine national intelligence. He just is so compelling in how he speaks. So go offline. Thank you, Malcolm, on Twitter. Please send him our thanks. Let's get to some of the news of the day in the remaining time that we have left, because this week, like I said at the beginning of the episode, is going to be a very, very packed week. First of all, we have the January 6th committee, which is expected to make 3 criminal referrals against Trump to the Department of Justice, and they are first, obstruction, second, conspiracy to defraud the government, and third, incitement of insurrection. I've heard from Politicon hosts, hashtag sisters-in-law, and other legal analysts every week, and these are expected to just be merely recommendations and symbolic, but I still don't think it should be lost on anyone that these are the charges being pressed against a former president. We can't overlook this. We can't normalize this. I think we have to do better than this as our president. We cannot allow presidents to just, commit things like obstruction, conspiracy to defraud the government, and incitement of insurrection. So that'll be today at 1 p.m. Eastern time. If you have the time, tune in. If you don't, I'm sure there'll be clips online because it's going to be really important for our democracy. Accountability matters. And I think we are at kind of an accountability lack of accountability, I guess, in this country right now. So we need this to happen. And hopefully DOJ and Jack Smith will act on it very, very soon. Next, I saw this interesting piece of news that Kevin McCarthy, probably maybe not shocking to anyone, is struggling with his bid to be speaker. This morning, Axios came out with this scoop that he's gathering 54 of his staunchest supporters to advocate for him and send strong statements on his behalf. And there's a pin now saying, OK, which is OK McCarthy, and they're it's kind of like a cult around McCarthy, these 54 people, and they include people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. But here's the rub for, I think, Kevin McCarthy. He still needs, even with these 54 members who are very, very strongly for him, he still needs 164 more members if he wants any chance of becoming speaker. So, there are 2 weeks left in this term until the new Congress gets sworn in. There is a lot of disarray in the Republican Party right now. And so we'll keep our eyes on that. But even if he does become speaker, who's not going to rule? It's not going to be Kevin McCarthy. It's going to be people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. If he can't even get enough members to endorse him as speaker, just imagine how hard of a time he is going to have as Speaker of the House. So that'll be interesting. We have one more update regarding Elon Musk. Over the weekend, he banned someone who I know and someone who I've had on with Jill Wine-Banks on iGen Politics, Taylor Lorenz. He banned Taylor Lorenz simply after she reached out to him for a comment and basically suspended her from Twitter. There was this whole ordeal. Basically, she appealed the decision, and then Twitter said she would never be let on. After that, she was let on. So Taylor Lorenz is back online, and I think that's just yet another indication of his attempt to silence those with whom he disagrees. It's this kind of free speech absolutist that he claims he is, just isn't the reality. And he also disabled people from being able to post links to other social media platforms. So someone tried posting a link to Mastodon. If you try to post a link to Instagram, Facebook, any other social media account, he is disabling that function. And so that's very concerning. And again, yet another indication that he's not the sort of free speech defender that he claims to be, just another hypocrisy moment of, he only cares about himself, attention. And, lastly, he launched a poll last night asking whether or not people should vote to basically vote to remain, have him remain on Twitter or go away from Twitter as its leader. And good news, 57% of the over 14 million people voted against his staying in position. So we'll see what happens. My guess is that he won't follow the voice of the people, but we'll see what happens there. All I know is that Elon Musk is erratic. He's someone who I think really craves attention. He is what seems to be a narcissist, someone who only cares about his self-image. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Lastly, I just want to wish everyone a very happy Hanukkah for those who celebrate it. Hopefully you have a great first night. And later this week, I know will be Christmas Eve. So hopefully everyone has a great start to their holiday season. It's not going to be a slow news week. So we will be here every day to cover everything that's happening except for Friday, Christmas Eve. But every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it'll be a packed week. Let me just give you a quick preview. Tomorrow, we're going to have on Ellie Honig to help us break down what happened with the January 6th committee hearing. Ellie is a CNN legal analyst. On Wednesday, we're going to have on Nabila Syed, who's from my home state, Illinois, and she's the first Gen Zer elected to the Illinois state legislature. So we'll be talking about Gen Zers and power, Gen Zers and the Illinois state legislature and across the country. That'll be a very exciting episode. And then on Thursday, you guys may have heard of her. We have Jill Wine-Banks joining us to talk about all the legal news of the week and what we should expect in the weeks to come. So it's going to be a great week, I think. Join us every day at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. And be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Please have a safe day and tune into the January 6th hearings. I will see you tomorrow to break it all down with Ellie Honig. Thanks so much.